Anna Louise had never, even in her darkest and most cynical moments, imagined that the man with whom she had envisioned building a lifetime of dreams would become the very force that would lay those dreams to waste. When she first met Isaac, he was the life of the party, a charismatic presence in the bustling, historic neighborhoods of Savannah, Georgia. He was charming, surrounded by a wide circle of friends, and constantly spoke of his grand ambitions, promising that he would work tirelessly to build a life of dignity, comfort, and security for them. They fell in love with a rapid, dizzying intensity, and it wasn't long before they decided to take the leap and move into a small, rented cottage, nestled on the quieter, oak-shaded outskirts of the city. The house was modest, with weathered wooden floorboards and windows that rattled whenever the coastal breeze swept in from the Atlantic. But for Anna Louise, it was an absolute paradise. She was a young woman of 24, deeply romantic and endlessly optimistic, believing with every fiber of her being that their love would be an impenetrable fortress against any hardship the world might throw their way. A few months after they settled into their humble home, their lives were blessed with the arrival of Sarah, a beautiful baby girl with wide, curious eyes that seemed to absorb every detail of the world around her, and a radiant smile capable of illuminating even the darkest, dampest corners of their drafty house. Wishing to dedicate herself entirely to nurturing her daughter during these crucial, formative years, Anna Louise made the difficult decision to leave her job as a receptionist at a local community center. She comforted herself with the belief that this would be nothing more than a temporary pause in her career, a brief interval that would last only until Sarah grew old enough to enroll in preschool. But as the months wore on, the idyllic life she had envisioned began to splinter and decay from the inside out. The change in Isaac was gradual at first, then terrifyingly swift. He began coming home later and later, his excuses wearing thinner with each passing week. Soon, the sharp, unmistakable odor of cheap whiskey and stale beer would precede him, drifting through the front door before he had even turned the key in the lock. The promises he made, tearful, desperate vows that he would change, that he would stop drinking, that he would be the man she deserved, never lasted more than 2 or 3 agonizing days before he fell back into the same destructive patterns. As the weeks dissolved into months, his guilt curdled into resentment, and the gentle man Anna Louise had fallen in love with was replaced by a bitter stranger who took pleasure in her humiliation. "You're completely useless," Isaac would sneer, his voice dripping with venom as he stumbled into the kitchen, his eyes bloodshot and vacant. "You do nothing but sit here and live off my hard work. You'd be absolutely nothing without me." These cruel, degrading words quickly became the background music of Anna Louise's daily existence. To prevent these volatile arguments from escalating in front of their impressionable young daughter, she learned to lower her head, bite her lip, and swallow her pride, offering no resistance to his venomous tirades. Countless times, she would quietly excuse herself, retreating into the tiny, cold bathroom, just so she could turn on the faucet to drown out the sound of her weeping in silence. While little Sarah played innocently with her worn-out toys in the next room, completely oblivious to the storm raging within her home, the stack of unpaid bills on the kitchen counter grew taller and more menacing. The hard-earned money that should have gone toward rent, groceries, and utilities was instead swallowed up by the noisy taverns and neon-lit bars downtown. Despite the crushing weight of her anxiety, Anna Louise made it her absolute mission to ensure that Sarah's childhood remained untouched by this domestic horror. Every single night, without fail, she would tuck her daughter into bed with a warm, protective embrace and a soothing bedtime story before the little girl closed her eyes to sleep. The breaking point arrived on a bitterly cold, damp Tuesday morning, when the winter fog hung low over the Savannah River. Without saying a single word, Isaac began packing his few belongings, stuffing his worn denim jeans and t-shirts into a faded canvas backpack. He pulled his favorite tattered baseball cap low over his forehead, the cap he virtually never took off, and walked deliberately toward the front door. He did not look at Anna Louise. nor did he cast a glance toward the small hallway where their daughter's tiny shoes were neatly lined up. He paused at the threshold, and with a chilling, detached coldness that made her shiver, he uttered the words that would shatter her world into a million pieces. "I don't love you anymore, Anna. I'm completely suffocated by this life, and I'm done. You're on your own now. Figure it out." Terrified, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs, Anna Louise lunged forward and desperately grabbed his arm, her eyes pleading through a thick veil of hot tears. "Isaac, please, you can't do this," she sobbed, her voice cracking with desperation. "What about me? What about Sarah? She's only 4 years old. How can you just walk away from your own daughter?" He did not flinch, nor did he look her in the eyes. He simply shrugged his shoulders, with an icy, agonizing indifference, shaking her hand off his jacket, as if she were nothing more than a minor annoyance. "That's your problem, not mine," he muttered flatly. The heavy wooden door slammed shut behind him, the sound echoing through the empty rooms like a gunshot. An oppressive, suffocating silence immediately descended upon the house. In that devastating, motionless instant, the sheer gravity of her situation crashed down upon Anna Louise's shoulders. She realized with absolute, terrifying clarity that she was completely and utterly alone. She had no job, no savings, no college degree, and a 4-year-old daughter whose entire survival, well-being, and future now depended solely and exclusively on her. That night, as she lay in bed clutching a sleeping Sarah tightly against her chest, the tears finally stopped flowing, replaced by a cold, fierce resolve. She made a quiet, solemn vow to her daughter and to herself. She did not yet know how, nor did she know where she would find the strength, but she would rebuild their lives from the ashes of this abandonment. The very morning after Isaac walked out, Anna Louise woke up long before the first rays of the Georgia sun could pierce through the heavy morning fog. She sat on the edge of her bed, looking down at the peaceful, innocent face of little Sarah, who was still fast asleep, completely unaware of the cataclysm that had reshaped her world. Anna Louise took a deep, shuddering breath and closed her eyes, consciously pushing down the rising tide of panic. There was simply no more time left for her to cry. Her daughter needed to eat. Her daughter needed to be dressed, and most importantly, her daughter needed to see her mother smile, even if Anna Louise's heart was fractured into 1,000 jagged pieces. For several grueling weeks, Anna Louise embarked on a relentless, exhausting search for employment, walking the historic, cobblestone streets of Savannah until her feet were blistered and swollen. She knocked on every door she passed, entering supermarkets, local bakeries, clothing boutiques, and busy corporate offices. In nearly every establishment, she was met with the exact same polite, dismissive response from managers who barely looked her in the eyes. "We'll keep your resume on file and give you a call if anything opens up." But the phone never rang. Without any recent professional experience on her resume and lacking a higher education degree, she returned home each evening more discouraged, exhausted, and terrified than the day before. Meanwhile, their meager financial resources dwindled to nothing, while the pile of demanding bills continued to accumulate. Out of sheer desperation, Anna Louise began to sell off the few possessions of value they owned. First went the small television set from the living room, which fetched barely enough cash to buy groceries for a week. Next was the microwave, sold to a local pawn shop. Just a few days later, she was forced to make the agonizing decision to sell their refrigerator, replacing it with a small, cheap plastic cooler filled with bags of ice to keep Sarah's milk from spoiling. Each piece of furniture that was carried out of their small cottage felt like a physical extraction of her soul, carrying away a piece of the fragile hope she was fighting so hard to maintain. The neighbors in their quiet residential block began to notice the subtle, worrying signs of distress coming from the little house. Mrs. Clara, an elderly, kind-hearted widow who lived next door and spent her afternoons tending to her rose bushes, appeared at Anna Louise's front door one morning. In her frail, trembling hands, She carried a heavy canvas grocery bag, overflowing with bags of white rice, pinto beans, fresh milk, a loaf of honey wheat bread, and a few gently used children's clothes that her own grandchildren had outgrown. Anna Louise's immediate instinct was to politely decline the charity, her pride stinging. But as she looked at the food, the dam of her emotions finally broke. She collapsed into the older woman's arms, weeping uncontrollably as Mrs. Clara held her tightly, whispering words of comfort and reassurance into her hair. Just when she thought things could not possibly get any worse, another devastating blow struck. Because she had been forced to choose between buying food and paying the utility bills, the electric company cut off their power. When the light bulbs suddenly flickered and died, plunging the house into darkness, little Sarah looked up from her coloring book, her eyes wide with innocent confusion. "Mommy, did the lights go sleepy by?" she asked. Anna Louise forced a bright, cheerful smile onto her face, swallowing the lump of sorrow in her throat so she wouldn't frighten her daughter. "Actually, sweetie, we're going to play a super fun game tonight," she said, her voice dripping with artificial enthusiasm. "We are going to go camping right here in the living room." She lit a few old candles she found in the kitchen drawer, creating a warm, flickering glow. But the moment Sarah turned her back to play with her dolls in the candlelight, Anna Louise turned her face toward the dark corner of the room, silently wiping away the hot, bitter tears that slid down her cheeks. Later that same night, after the candles had burned down and Sarah had finally fallen into a deep, peaceful sleep on their makeshift living room bed, Anna Louise knelt down on the hard, cold wooden floor. With her hands tightly clasped together and her eyes brimming with tears, she poured her heart out in a desperate, whispered prayer that would ultimately alter the entire course of her life. "Lord, I am not asking you for riches, and I am not asking for an easy path," she sobbed softly into the quiet room. "I only ask for an opportunity, just one door to open. Please, write a new story for me and my beautiful daughter. Give me the chance to stand on my own 2 feet." She did not know it then, but the universe was already aligning, preparing a compassionate soul to cross her path at the exact moment she needed it most. The following morning, Anna Louise resolutely wiped away her tears, washed her face with cold water, dressed Sarah in her neatest clothes, and walked her to the local community daycare center. Before she closed the front door of her darkened home, she looked up at the vast gray Georgia sky and whispered, "Lord, I place my trust in you." She had absolutely no idea that this ordinary chilly day would be the one that would completely rewrite her destiny. After dropping Sarah off, Anna Louise was walking aimlessly down the street, her mind clouded with worry, when her eyes were drawn to the imposing, red brick facade of the city's largest medical center. Near the main sliding glass entrance, posted on a public bulletin board, was a simple, printed flyer. "Help wanted. Environmental services, cleaning assistant. Apply within." Her heart began to race, a sudden surge of warmth washing over her as she remembered her prayer from the night before. With trembling hands, she walked through the doors and approached the main reception desk, asking for an application. The receptionist, a kind woman with a warm smile, handed her the paperwork and explained that the hiring supervisor happened to be conducting open interviews that very morning. Anna Louise offered a silent, overwhelming prayer of thanks and sat down in the waiting area, clutching her worn purse tightly to stop her hands from shaking. Every single minute that ticked by on the large wall clock felt like an absolute eternity. A short while later, her name was called, and she was led into a quiet office to meet with the Environmental Services Supervisor, a maternal woman named Martha. The interview was straightforward, but instead of trying to present a polished, flawless front, Anna Louise chose to speak with raw, unfiltered honesty. She did not hide the fact that she was a single mother, going through an incredibly difficult time, and that she desperately needed this job to provide a basic roof over her daughter's head. When she finished speaking, Martha looked at her for a long moment, her eyes softening with deep empathy. She smiled warmly and extended her hand. "You start this coming Monday at 6 o'clock in the morning." Anna Louise could not contain the tears of pure relief that spilled over her eyelashes. She thanked Martha profusely, her voice shaking with emotion. For the first time in many agonizing months, she felt a glimmer of genuine hope, a profound sense that a door was finally being opened for her. On Monday morning, long before the sun had even begun to hint at rising over the Savannah coastline, Anna Louise proudly pulled on the light blue scrub uniform of a hospital cleaning assistant. She gently woke Sarah, dressed her, walked her to the early morning daycare program, kissed her tenderly on the forehead, and set off toward the hospital, fueled by a fierce, unshakable determination to build a better life for her child. As she pushed her heavy cleaning cart down the long, sterile corridors of the hospital for the very first time, smelling the sharp scent of antiseptic, she repeated a silent mantra to herself. This is just the beginning. I can do this. She was completely unaware, however, that someone was already observing her. On the far side of the busy corridor, Dr. William was just wrapping up a consultation with one of his patients. He was one of the most respected pediatric cardiologists at the medical center, a tall, elegant man in his late 30s, with a neatly trimmed beard, dark, intelligent eyes, and short-cropped black hair. He possessed a calm, commanding presence, yet there was an undeniable warmth in the way he interacted with everyone he met. As he stood talking to a colleague, his gaze briefly connected with Anna Louise as she diligently mopped the tiled floor nearby. Sensing his gaze, she quickly lowered her head out of professional courtesy and continued her work, steering her cart down the hallway. William stood frozen for a moment, watching her retreat. There was something about her, a quiet dignity, a grace in her movements, and an underlying sorrow in her eyes that even her polite, professional smile could not entirely mask. It was a fleeting, seemingly insignificant moment, but it marked the very first encounter between two lives that were destined to become inextricably intertwined. As the days turned into weeks, Anna Louise quickly won the hearts of patients and staff alike, with her impeccable work ethic, her gentle manners, and her quiet dedication. She was always the first to arrive for her shift, meticulously preparing her equipment before the clock even struck 6. She performed her demanding duties in quiet efficiency, but what truly set her apart was the genuine compassion she showed to everyone she encountered. Even when she believed no one was watching, she would pause her work to offer a reassuring word to an anxious patient, or help an elderly visitor navigate the confusing, maze-like hallways of the massive hospital. Without her realizing it, these small, beautiful acts of kindness continued to capture the attention of Dr. William. He began to notice the subtle, extraordinary details of her daily presence. He saw her quietly fetch a warm cup of water for a coughing patient waiting in the emergency room. He saw her make a silly, playful face to bring a sudden burst of laughter to a frightened child confined to a wheelchair, and he saw her offer a gentle, comforting smile to a family member weeping silently in the waiting room. Anna Louise was doing far more than simply sanitizing floors and emptying waste bins. She was actively spreading warmth, light, and hope everywhere her feet took her. One afternoon, while sitting in the bustling doctor's lounge, William finally decided to ask about her. "Does anyone know the name of the new cleaning assistant who works the morning shift on the pediatric ward?" he inquired casually. A nearby nurse smiled warmly. "Oh, you mean Anna Louise. She's been here for about a month now. She is absolutely wonderful, always so sweet and incredibly hard-working." Another nurse chimed in, lowering her voice slightly. "Yes, she's a lovely girl. I heard from one of the admissions clerks that she went through a terrible divorce recently, but apparently, she's still holding on to hope that her ex-husband will come back to his senses and return to her." William fell into a quiet, thoughtful silence upon hearing this. If that information was indeed true, he resolved that he would never do anything to disrupt her life, or cause her any further emotional confusion. He respected her journey far too much to intrude upon her healing process. Yet, despite his conscious efforts to keep his thoughts occupied with his demanding medical practice, He found himself constantly looking out for her. He would run into her in the hallways, sometimes offering a warm, polite morning greeting, and other times asking if she needed a hand pushing her heavy, overloaded supply cart. Anna Louise always responded to his kindness with a shy, appreciative smile, but she carefully kept her distance, avoiding any conversation that went beyond brief professional pleasantries. After the devastating betrayal she had suffered at the hands of Isaac, her heart had constructed massive, fortified walls, and she was terrified of letting anyone close enough to hurt her again. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, William was walking past the main lobby reception desk when he noticed a small, glossy piece of paper lying face down on the polished linoleum floor. He bent down and picked it up, turning it over to find a slightly crumpled photograph of Anna Louise, her face radiant with a genuine, unburdened smile, holding a little girl with bright, twinkling eyes who was laughing hysterically. Just as he was examining the photo, he saw Anna Louise rushing back toward the lobby, her eyes wide with panic, as she frantically searched the ground. He stepped forward, holding out the photograph with a reassuring smile. "Looking for this?" he asked gently. She gasped, clutching her chest, as she took the picture from his hand. "Oh, thank goodness. Yes, thank you so much, Doctor. I must have dropped it when I was pulling my keys out." "She's absolutely beautiful," William said, gesturing toward the child in the photo. "Is she your daughter?" Anna Louise's entire face lit up, her eyes shining with a profound, unconditional love that touched William to his very core. "Yes, this is my Sarah. She's 4 years old, and she is the absolute center of my universe. She is the reason I breathe, the reason I keep going every single day." William smiled, a warm, fluttering sensation blooming in his chest. In that very instant, without even fully realizing it, he found himself falling deeply, irrevocably in love with her. It wasn't just her delicate, natural beauty that captivated him, it was her fierce, maternal strength, her profound humility, and her extraordinary ability to carry such a heavy, invisible burden while still radiating so much light to the world around her. That night, as he drove back to his quiet home in the historic district of the city, William could not banish the image of Anna Louise from his mind. The heart of one of the most prominent, respected medical professionals in Savannah now belonged entirely to the gentle, soft-spoken woman who spent her days keeping the hospital corridors clean. By the following week, William realized that he could no longer suppress or conceal the depth of his feelings. He found himself inventing harmless, creative pretexts just to walk down the specific corridors where Anna Louise was assigned to work, finding immense comfort and joy in simply catching a brief glimpse of her smile. Yet Anna Louise continued to maintain a careful, professional distance. The ghost of her past still haunted her, and she was terrified of trusting another man, especially one who occupied such a vastly different social and professional sphere than her own. A few weeks later, during a quiet afternoon break, William gathered his courage and sat down at a small table near hers, in the hospital's crowded cafeteria. The conversation started with simple, safe topics. He asked how she was adjusting to the demands of her shift, and if she felt comfortable with the hospital staff. Anna Louise answered him with her characteristic politeness, completely unaware that this highly esteemed physician was hanging on to her every word, desperately searching for any excuse to prolong their conversation and remain by her side for just a few minutes longer. Over the course of the next several weeks, through gradual, comfortable conversations, William finally learned the true story of her past. She wasn't pining for her ex-husband at all. The truth was far more painful. Isaac had abandoned her and their young daughter without a single penny, leaving them to face eviction and starvation without ever looking back. Hearing the raw pain in her voice, William felt a tight, painful constriction in his chest. In that quiet moment of shared vulnerability, he made a silent, sacred promise to himself that he would do everything within his power to bring joy, security, and laughter back into her life. A few days later, a sudden torrential downpour rolled over the city just as the afternoon shift was ending. Standing near the main exit, William spotted Anna Louise waiting under the building's concrete awning, shivering in the damp, chilly air as she watched for her bus, her clothes already partially soaked by the driving rain. Without a second thought, he walked briskly to the parking lot, drove his car around to the front entrance, and rolled down the passenger window. "Anna, please, let me give you a ride home," he called out warmly. "It's pouring, and the buses are going to be delayed for hours." She hesitated, looking up at the dark, stormy sky, and then back at the kind, earnest expression on the doctor's face. For a fleeting second, her deeply ingrained fear and self-defense mechanisms urged her to politely decline, but there was something so inherently safe, gentle, and trustworthy about William that her defenses began to melt. She opened the door and climbed into the dry, warm passenger seat. During the drive through the rain-slicked streets of Savannah, the initial awkwardness quickly gave way to a comfortable, flowing conversation. For the first time, Anna Louise spoke openly about Sarah, her voice filling the quiet car with warmth as she described her daughter's funny antics, her love for drawing, and how her laughter was the only medicine that could heal her mother's weary soul. William listened to every single word with rapt, undivided attention, his heart swelling with admiration. When they finally pulled up in front of her modest, weathered cottage, Anna Louise turned to him, her eyes filled with genuine gratitude. "Thank you, Dr. William. This was incredibly kind of you." Before she could open the car door, William looked at her, his eyes steady and filled with a profound sincerity. "Anna, you are an incredibly strong woman," he said softly, "but you don't have to carry the weight of the entire world on your shoulders all by yourself." Those beautiful, comforting words echoed in her mind like a sweet melody, keeping her warm throughout the cold, rainy night. A few days later, William arrived at her house on his day off, holding a small box of gourmet chocolates for Sarah and a delicate, hand-tied bouquet of wildflowers for Anna Louise. As she stood in her living room, watching this successful, highly educated doctor sit unpretentiously on her worn rug, playing a silly matching game with Sarah, and laughing heartily at her childish jokes, Anna Louise felt a profound shift within her soul. She saw in William everything that Isaac had lacked: respect, tenderness, consistent presence, and an innate kindness. For the very first time since she had been abandoned, her guarded heart began to whisper that perhaps, just perhaps, she was being allowed to believe in the promise of a beautiful new beginning. Following that wonderful afternoon spent with Sarah, William knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that he could no longer contain the love that had taken root in his heart. For the first time in many years, his life felt infused with a vibrant, beautiful purpose. On a crisp autumn afternoon, as their shifts ended, he asked Anna Louise to join him for a brief walk through the hospital's quiet, manicured therapeutic gardens. The air was filled with the sweet, earthy scent of fallen leaves, and the golden afternoon light filtered through the branches of the ancient oak trees. William took a deep breath, turning to face her, as they stopped near a quiet stone bench. "Anna, from the very first moment I saw you working in the corridor, I knew there was something extraordinary about you," he began, his voice rich with emotion. "It wasn't just your beauty that captured my heart, though you are stunning. It was your incredible resilience, your quiet courage, and the beautiful, selfless love you pour into Sarah every single day." Anna Louise immediately cast her eyes downward, her fingers nervously tracing the fabric of her coat. Her heart desperately wanted to leap forward and embrace his words, but her mind was instantly flooded with the painful, lingering echoes of Isaac's cruel insults. With a trembling voice and tears welling in her eyes, she looked up at him. "Dr. William, please, you must understand. I am just a simple cleaning assistant. I have a young daughter, I have no money, and I was abandoned by the man who was supposed to love me. I don't want to bring my complicated, messy life into yours and drag you down." William stepped closer, his movements slow and deliberate, and gently reached out to clasp her cold, trembling hands in his own. "Anna, look at me," he urged softly. You could never drag my life down. You bring light, warmth, and joy to every single person who has the absolute privilege of knowing you. And Sarah is not a burden. She is a beautiful blessing. If you will allow me, if you can find it in your heart to trust me, I want nothing more than to cherish, protect, and care for both of you for the rest of my life." The hot tears spilled over her cheeks, but this time they were tears of profound healing. For the very first time in her life, someone was looking at her and making her feel that she was entirely, beautifully sufficient, just as she was. A few weeks later, they officially began dating. William made it a daily point to wait for her after her shifts, so they could walk out together. He planned wonderful weekend outings, taking Anna Louise and Sarah to the local parks, the beach, and children's museums. Very quickly, without them even consciously realizing it, the three of them began to form the warm, close-knit bond of a real family. Anna Louise found herself laughing freely, her face glowing with a vibrant, radiant happiness she hadn't experienced in years. On a lovely, sunny Sunday afternoon, William decided the time had come to introduce Anna Louise to his mother, Mrs. Susan. Mrs. Susan was a prominent figure in Savannah's elite social circles, an elegant, formidable woman who placed immense value on family lineage, social status, and proper societal standing. The moment Anna Louise walked through the grand double doors of Mrs. Susan's historic mansion, holding little Sarah's hand, the atmosphere in the room turned icy cold. Mrs. Susan's polite, aristocratic smile instantly vanished, replaced by a rigid, disapproving stare. They had barely sat down at the formal, polished mahogany dining table for lunch, when Mrs. Susan turned her sharp, critical gaze toward her son, completely ignoring Anna Louise's presence. "William, darling, I must confess I am utterly bewildered," she said, her voice dripping with aristocratic condescension. "I certainly expected that my only son, a highly respected physician, would choose a future partner who didn't come with the baggage of another man's child, let alone someone from such a different walk of life." An oppressive, agonizing silence fell over the dining room. Anna Louise felt as though she had been struck physically, her heart fracturing all over again. The painful memory of being told she was worthless rushed back with a vengeance. She refused to let herself be diminished like this again. She stood up from the table, her posture straight and her chin held high, despite the tears that were stinging her eyes. She looked directly at Mrs. Susan, her voice quiet, but remarkably steady. "I made a solemn promise to myself that I would never allow anyone to humiliate me or my daughter ever again." She gently took Sarah's hand, turned on her heel, and walked out of the grand house. William immediately stood up, calling her name as he ran after her, but by the time he reached the street, Anna Louise had already hailed a passing taxi, disappearing into the city traffic. Standing on the pavement, William felt a wave of hot anger wash over him. He realized with absolute clarity that if he wanted to protect the woman he loved, he would have to stand up to his own mother. Following that disastrous luncheon, a deeply wounded Anna Louise made the painful decision to distance herself from William. She loved him too much to stand between him and his family, and she could not bear the thought of him being forced to choose between his mother and the woman he loved. She asked him, through a tearful phone call, not to contact her for a while so they could both think. But William flatly refused to give up on the family they were building. He visited her house repeatedly, brought toys for Sarah, left beautiful bouquets on her porch, and wrote her heartfelt letters, constantly reiterating his devotion. "I chose you, Anna, and I will never let anyone's prejudice or snobbery tear us apart." At the same time, William confronted his mother. For the very first time in his life, he defied her authority, making it clear that he would not sacrifice his personal happiness for the sake of social appearances. He told Mrs. Susan that if she could not accept Anna Louise and Sarah, she would lose him as well. Despite the cold rejection she had suffered, Anna Louise harbored no bitterness. She wanted to show Mrs. Susan that her love for William was pure, and that she was a woman of character. Over the next few weeks, whenever she knew William was visiting his mother, she would send along small, thoughtful gestures, sometimes a simple card, other times a delicious peach cobbler she had baked herself. But Mrs. Susan remained cold, dismissively setting the gifts aside without a word of appreciation. Finally, Anna Louise decided to make one last, sincere attempt. She pooled together a portion of her hard-earned savings and purchased a bottle of delicate, rare lavender perfume. She brought it to Mrs. Susan's home herself. When the older woman opened the door, Anna Louise offered a gentle, sad smile. "Mrs. Susan, this will be the very last time I trouble you," she said softly. "I do not wish to force my presence where I am not welcome. I only wanted to leave you with this small token, and to sincerely wish you nothing but happiness." She handed her the gift, turned, and quietly walked away. Curious and slightly unsettled, Mrs. Susan slowly opened the elegant wrapping and sprayed a small mist of the perfume onto her wrist. The moment the sweet, familiar scent reached her senses, she froze, her heart stopping in her chest. It was the exact, unmistakable fragrance of white lavender that her late daughter, Helen, had worn every single day before she tragically passed away in an accident years ago. Memories of her lost daughter flooded her mind, along with the gentle words Helen had once spoken to her. "Mommy, never judge a book by its cover. Always look at the beauty of a person's heart." Mrs. Susan collapsed onto her sofa, weeping tears of deep, profound regret. The very next morning, she drove her elegant car to Anna Louise's humble cottage. When the door opened, Anna Louise was stunned to see the proud matriarch standing on her porch, her eyes red and swollen. Before Anna Louise could say a word, Mrs. Susan reached out and pulled her into a tight, desperate embrace, her voice sobbing against her shoulder. "Please, forgive me, my dear. I was so blinded by pride and status that I couldn't see the beautiful, noble soul standing right in front of me. You have a heart of gold, and you belong in our family." A few months later, on a gorgeous, sun-drenched spring morning, William and Anna Louise were married in a small, intimate ceremony held in the hospital's beautiful therapeutic gardens, surrounded by the true friends, colleagues, and neighbors who had supported them through their darkest days. As the music began to play, Mrs. Susan walked down the aisle, proudly holding little Sarah's hand, and before the gathered guests, she warmly introduced the little girl as her beloved granddaughter. Looking at his beautiful bride walking toward him, William smiled through tears of pure joy. Anna Louise felt a deep, overwhelming sense of gratitude wash over her, realizing that the desperate prayer she had whispered in the dark on her knees had been answered in the most beautiful way possible. For those who have lived long lives, navigating the unpredictable storms of youth, disappointment, and loss, this story serves as a gentle, profound reminder of the resilient nature of the human spirit. In our younger years, we often believe that our lives must follow a straight, flawless trajectory. And when a relationship crumbles, a dream shatters, or a door is cruelly slammed in our faces, we are quick to believe that our personal narrative has reached its final, tragic chapter. But life, in its infinite wisdom and complexity, does not operate on our fragile timelines. True strength is not found in never falling, but in the quiet, courageous resolve to wake up before the sun, wipe away our tears, and take one small, determined step forward, even when the path ahead is shrouded in complete darkness. Often, the most agonizing endings of our lives are not endings at all, but the painful, necessary clearing of ground for the construction of something far more beautiful, resilient, and enduring than we could have ever built on our own. True love, dignity, and family are not defined by social standing, wealth, or the superficial approval of others. They are forged in the quiet fire of mutual respect, shared struggles, and the unwavering courage to stand by those we cherish when the storm is at its fiercest. To those who find themselves in the midst of their own cold, dark winter, clutching their broken dreams in the silence of an empty room, take heart. Do not lose faith in the morning, for the most exquisite, breathtaking chapters of your life's journey are often waiting to be written immediately after your greatest sorrows.